Hello everyone and welcome to this video on this course of getting started with Angular. In this part of the course we will be going over the life cycle hooks in Angular, which I personally believe are some of the most important concepts in order to get good with Angular. To sum it up theoretically, life cycle hooks are used to track the progress of the state of a component, and what I mean by that is when a component gets initialized, when a component gets destroyed, and if something changes inside of the component as long as it's in the DOM, we need a way to track what is happening inside of that component, and these life cycle hooks help us do that. It's a bit hard to explain it theoretically, but once I give you guys a practical demo, I believe it will be much easier to grasp this content. There are numerous, or there are like a bunch of life cycle hooks. Some of them I've already listed out over here, but most of them you guys will be not using that much throughout your career as a front-end engineer, a software engineer, or as a full stack engineer. But there are a few of these which do get used quite often, and I believe that it's best practice to have a solid understanding of these. So yeah, with the let's get to the practical part. The ng on init lifecycle hook is called only once when the component is initialized. Whenever a component gets inserted inside of the DOM, the ng on init is called. After that, no matter what is changing, what input or what output, whatever is changing inside of the component, the ng on init lifecycle hook will not be called again. To give you guys a practical example, this is the project which we were working on previously. And if you guys remember, we have the customer and the customers, the multiple customers component. And inside of this multiple customers component, I have initialized the single customer component right over here. If I were to go into the customer.component.ts, and let me just do alert on init called like this. So as you can see, whenever I refresh the project, I get on init called. But after that, if something is being input or something is being sent into the component, or the component is outputting something, the ng on init will not be called. The ng on init is always called once. Now the other lifecycle hook is the ng on changes, and the ng on changes is called every time something is input. Like obviously this input output events listeners are some of the concepts which I've gone over previously, but whenever a variable changes, like something is input inside of the component and its value has changed, the ng on changes will be called. So let's see what I mean by that. I have defined a variable over here by the name of test. It is an input variable. So basically it is coming from the parent. And if I go over to the parent, which is the multiple customers component, right now what I need to do is I need to bind to this component, and I will bind to this variable, which is also known as test, inside of the customers.component.ts. I have not done that. So what I do is I define a variable like this, string, and what I will do right now is on the add new customer, whenever I click on that add new customer button, which previously was adding customers to the array, but now I have commented this code out. What I will do is I'll do this.test is equal to math.random, because I want my value to change every time. And I will tell you guys what I mean by why do I want my values to change all the time. .toString, because I want to send a string. If I go back to my customers.component.ts, what I'll do is I will do a console.log, and I will console.log this.test. I will try to, if I can just open the network inspector tool. Okay, yeah, the inspect tool over here. Go to the console and let's see what I get. Apparently this .test is not being sent to ng on changes, so let's see why is that happening. This .test, it's an input value that is coming from so we have to debug this customer.component.html app-customer The app hyphen customer is getting test. This dot test is equal to math dot random dot toString. So why is this not being sent? Okay, I think I confused something over there. For ng on init changes to be fired in the first place, I have to click this button, which will change the value of this dot test in the first place, which it is not doing. Sorry about that. So what I do is I click on add customer. So every time I click on add customer, these values are appearing inside the console.log, which is over here, this dot test. And if I go over here, as you can see, I'm just assigning a new value to this dot test, which is math.random.toString. But what I wanted to originally do, let me just assign it a value. The initial value which I was sending was an empty string, and the expectation was also an empty string on the customer.component.ts. But what if I change this value to something other than an empty string? If I go over here, as you can see, I can see my name. And if I do an alert on this just to see what gets called first, does ng on init get called first or ng on changes? Let's see. So as you can see, ng on changes was called first, ng on init gets called second. ng on changes will always get called first if the value coming into the component is changing. That's the first thing. And after that, ng on init will be called. And after that, whenever the input value changes, the input property that is coming into the component is changing, ng on changes will be fired every time. But there is an exception to this rule, and I will get to that exception in a second. What if I go to my customer.component.ts, and let's just not make it an alert anymore. Let's just do a console.log over here, like this. I have my, and also remove the alert. We don't need this anymore. Right now I was sending a string, and every time I was clicking this button add new customer, it was sending a random mathematical number and converting to a string and sending it forward. What if I have something like this? Name Mohit, age 28. Now, and it's not a string, it's a dictionary, but I'll just make it an any. Now what I do is on add new customer, I will not change the main object because test is not an object. I'll just change the age, and I will do math dot random, and that's pretty much it. Now I am changing my object, right? If I go to my customer.component.ts and I'm going to get a console.log, it's not a string anymore. It should be an object. Let me go back to my application and see what happens. Let me just refresh it. I get the first object which comes from the parent, which is Mohit age 28, which was the initial value. If I click on add customer, nothing is happening, even though I am pretty sure the value is changing for the age. And I can even give this a try. Let's look at the debugger. Console.log this dot test. Let's just remove the debugger. Because we're only doing a console.log over here, so we'll know what is happening. We get ng on changes value over here, and if I click on add customer, as you can see, these values are changing when I click on the add new customer, but for some reason ng on changes is not picking these values up. These values over here, this dot test doesn't get sent to ng on changes, or ng on changes is not picking them up. And the reason is because the object itself, the reference object, is not changing. A value inside of it is changing. So, and that's a very important concept that you guys have to understand. With respect to ng on changes, it will only look at the whole object, like a string, like a number. But when it comes to dictionaries objects, if something inside of the object is changing, ng on changes will not pick it up. It will just not. And that is where another lifecycle hooks come into place, which is called ng do check. And ng do check does a full run over all the variables and even looks at the objects which have changed. If I were to do console.log this.test inside of ng do check, and by the way, all of these can be imported from, I think, Angular core. I will obviously be pushing this code into the Git repository, so you guys will have access to it. But what I mean by that is, let me just remove over here, go to customer.com.ts. I don't want to console.log over here as well. Let me go back to my application and see what I get. As you can see, ng do check is picking up those changes. Every time a value is changing, ng do check is picking it up, even if it's inside the object. So there's a limitation of ng on changes. It will only pick up values if the value as a whole changes. But if a value of one of the variables inside the object changes, ng on changes will not pick it up. This is where ng do check comes, which also takes into consideration the variables inside of the object. So this was a brief introduction to ng do check. The other variable, or the other, sorry, not variable, and other lifecycle hooks which I would like to go over is the ng after content init. And to be honest, I have never worked with it that much. I have never used it, but also an important concept to be aware of. So what I do is I go to my customers.component.html and I have app-customer like this. There is a concept called content projection, where you can project or inject your content inside of the child component. What I mean by that is, let's say I have an h1 tag and I say this content was projected. This content was projected. And if I go to my customer.component.html, I have an ng content tag over here. I had it initially, but let me just remove it. Do I see that content anywhere? I don't. This content was projected, the h1 tag, I don't see it anywhere. But if I bring back the ng content tag, save the project, I can see it now. So basically I am projecting my content from the parent to the child using the ng content tag. Now what I do is, I would like to do something. This h1 tag, I would like to give it a reference, hashtag projected, something like that. Let's just give it a name. And I go back to my child component, customer.component.ts over here. And what I decide to do is, I would like to get access to the content inside of ng-content. What I do is, I use the content child element reference. I mean, I'm not, for lack of a better term, but it's very similar to what view child does. It is used to access elements from the projected content in a nutshell. And I need to give it a name, and the name will be of the element over here, the element reference name, which is projected, like this. And I will do very similar to view child, projected, and I'll call it element ref. Now what I want to do is, I want to run experiment. If I do console.log this dot projected dot native element inside of on init, I want to see what I get. Go back to my project. Let me just refresh it. Native element, the projected on native element. Okay, so for some reason it's not picking that value up. Oh yeah, it's not, and I'll tell you why. Let me just do projected. Forget the native element part, sorry. I'm getting an undefined. And the reason I'm getting undefined is that the projected content gets initialized after ng on init is run. If we want to access projected content inside of our component, for projected content we have ng after content init, after the content which is coming from which is the projected content, after that is initialized, this is when this lifecycle hook is run. And I will do on content init just to let me know that where it is coming from. If I go back and if I were to refresh the project, as you can see, element, native element on content init. Now it's not undefined anymore because, as I said, projected content is only rendered after the ng after content init lifecycle hook is called. And the very similar one, a similar lifecycle hook is after content checked. It's very similar, ng after content init, but the only difference is that it is called after all the content has been checked. To be honest, I don't have a very, I don't have the, I guess, the big differentiator between these two, like when one is called after the component has been initialized and the other is called after the content has been checked. But to be honest, even after content init will get the job done. 99% of times, if you decide to access projected content, after content init will get the job done. I cannot think of a scenario where after content check can be used and after content init cannot be. But if you guys have that scenario, feel free to share it with me. More learning for me, I guess. Yeah. The other we're just down to 3 more lifecycle hooks, and this is after view init. Sorry, not view check, view init. And after view init is used when the whole view has been initialized, and I will let you know what I mean by that. So let's say inside the customer.component.html, I have this. Let me add an h2 tag, right? Like h1, we can make it h1, and we call it random. Just giving it a name. Hello, random, not double O. So go inside the project. I don't see the h. Okay, I should have seen that content was projected. Oh yeah, sorry, I apologize. Hello is right there. But what I want to do is I want to access this element inside of my TypeScript file. I can do that using the view child decorator, and the name of the element reference is random. We'll give that a variable name of random as well. Element ref should be good to go. If I do a console.log this.random like this, let me see what I get. I get an undefined because the view is only initialized after ng on it has run. But if I were to take this and go inside of my ng after content init, let me just remove this one as well because we don't need it anymore. Let me see what I get. I still get undefined because the entire HTML itself, it gets loaded after the ng hyphen content projected content gets inserted. So this is run first, and then all of these element tags are inserted. But if I go inside of here ng after view, and after view the whole view has been initialized, I should see something, and I do get the element ref over here, and the whole thing is present. So in short, if you got like in a nutshell, if you guys want to use the view child decorator inside of any of your lifecycle hooks, go for the ng after view init. If you guys want to use the content child decorator, go for the ng after content init. And I will not be going with ng after view checked. It's very similar to after view init, and the concept is very similar to the after content init and after content check. But there is one last lifecycle hook which I believe is very, very important, and it's the on destroy, and it is called every time a component gets removed from the DOM. And I think for this one, I have to make a certain number of changes. What I have to do is, let me just bring this old code back. Let me just comment this out. Let me comment this out. Let me just comment this back in. And let me see what I get. This is how everything was working. And all of these are components in the rightful rights. What if I decide to remove one of these components from the DOM? If I remove a component from the DOM, the ng on destroy will be called. And what I can do is console.log, not just console, alert on destroy called. I refresh, I go back to the app, nothing is happening, but let's say I want to add a button which can remove one of these components. I go to customer.component ts and let me see what I can do. And for every time, yep, we can possibly add a div. We can put this whole component inside of the div and ng like this, and we here can have a delete button. Let me see if I have. So what do I get? I mean, I have to add this, which is delete. Go back. So I have the delete button, but I have to add an action. What I'll do is, I'll add a click listener. I will do on delete like this, and I will pass the customer object to it. I go back to on delete. Yeah, it's a bit hard to set it up, but still worth the effort. On delete customer. And what does my customer contain? It contains an ID, a name, and an age. ID, name are obviously the same. The only thing which is a differentiator is the age. Or we can just pass the ID over here. Index as I can pass the index I, and this is the index. And what I do is, sorry, the brackets, this dot customer array dot splice index comma 1. Let me see what that gives. On destroy called. There you have it. That's ng on destroy for you. I removed the component from the DOM. ng on destroy was called. So yeah, I think this video is way over to the 20-minute mark. But yeah, these were all the lifecycle hooks for you guys. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to share with your friends and family, for that helps me out a lot. We'll be meeting in the next video. This is Mohit Lodi signing off.